This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And make sure to order Jamie Glazov's new critically acclaimed jihadist psychopath, how he is charming, seducing, and devouring us. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, the lockdown through mass hypnosis and entrancement. With us this evening, John Waters, an Irish writer and commentator. He is the author of 10 books, and he is also a playwright. He was the candidate for the Anti-Corruption Ireland Party in Dublin, Ireland. John, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Jane. Glad to be here.
Real honor to have you here. I saw a fascinating and profound video of you speaking about the mask and had to get you on and want to talk about that and all the interconnected issues. But first, just tell us a little bit about yourself and about the Anti-Corruption Ireland Party that you ran as a candidate for.
Well, as you said, I was a journalist for many years. I stopped being a journalist about 5 years ago because I realized that my profession had become utterly corrupt. I think not just in Ireland, but globally, really, at the mainstream level. Journalism had just become really part of a system of propaganda that was the contrary to what journalism was supposed to be. So I stopped being a journalist. I'm still a writer. I write occasionally for different magazines, First Things and The Spectator, magazines like that. Anti-Corruption Ireland is, as the name suggests, it's a party, or it's a movement which is addressing the intense corruption that's happening now in all aspects of Irish life: political, judicial, corporate, you name it. It's really rancid. Ireland has become, because we have been taken over essentially by American corporates who come to Ireland because we have one of the lowest corporate tax rates in the world, and it's essentially, that's the reason they're here. But they come and they want to change our country to make it more amenable to their ideology, and as a result, our country has been completely transformed under our feet. And so that's kind of, generally speaking, the things I address nowadays in a public sense.
Right, and I've been doing some research, and you're standing up against all the Marxism and the pro-vaccines and the attack on traditional values, and we'll get into that because all of that will overlap and be connected to our discussion. So, John, the powers that be in Ireland and in the United States and throughout the world, all of a sudden, within the blink of an eye, we're wearing masks, we're social distancing, we're being forced to stay at home, or this is what we're being told to do. What are they grooming us for?
Well, you see, I'm not 100% sure about that, but I have certain theories, and I've been a journalist. I don't necessarily jump to the theory. I kind of look at the facts in front of me and try to build them up piece by piece. But I have to say that from the beginning of this thing, in the very beginning, I was kind of convinced for a couple of weeks that there was something to this COVID-19 business. I was adhering to all the recommended things, the washing of hands and the wearing of gloves and all that kind of stuff, which is very tiresome now when I think back on it. And then I began to sort of, I was already beginning to look around and listen to various voices on the internet, and some amazing doctors from Germany and the United States. And I began to realize this was a complete crock. There's something really seriously wrong here, and the more it's gone on, the more extraordinary it has become, because they tell us it's about public health, but never in any of my lifetime have I seen less pretext for the kind of measures that are being taken. There's no proportionality between what we know, even at the worst, and we also know that the figures are being fiddled all the time. That they're basically describing, certifying all kinds of deaths which are nothing to do with COVID-19, and maybe it's to do with cancer or heart disease, whatever. But if somebody tests positive for COVID-19, their death is registered as COVID-19. So when if you have a really serious pandemic, you don't need to do stuff like this, basically, right? No, that's the first thing. The second thing is that, in relation to the mask, this is the thing that I was saying on that video you spoke about, that, all in Ireland, and I think United States as well, all through March, when this was building up, we were told masks weren't necessary, they were no use effectively, by the medical experts, by the same guys who are now telling us that they are essential. In April, when the so-called pandemic was at its height, the figures were like going through the roof, ostensibly, no talk about masks. May, it was beginning to subside. It had subsided by the end of May. Still no talk about masks. Then June passed, no talk about masks. And then suddenly, coming towards the end of July, the middle of July, we have to have mandatory masks on public transport and in shops, which we never had to do before. Why? What is the possible pretext for this? There is none. So I started to wonder about that, and just to look at some of I had written about the hypnotic elements of what's going on, because over the last few years, I've been writing about, say, we've had several referendums to do with abortion and gay marriage and so on, and in Ireland, and they're really, in my view, they've been forced upon us by American corporates who come to Ireland and want to dictate the nature of our society, and our political class just, capitulates to all of their demands. So I was using in the context of the massive waves of propaganda that were washing over Ireland in those years. I started to use what I call the metaphor of hypnosis. I said it was like hypnosis, and I was talking about it in these terms. And then one day I met an old friend of mine who, in the time we'd been out of touch, he told me he'd become a hypnotherapist. And I was, of course, suddenly embarrassed by this, because I didn't want to be, mixing it with an expert. And he says, yeah, I've heard you saying those things about hypnosis. He says, you're wrong about one thing. I said, what's that? He says, well, it's not a metaphor. What you're saying is absolutely right. That's what they're doing. And he went through the whole thing with me, described, how hypnosis works, and that it works on fear, or emotion, strong emotion of some kind. And in this case, in relation to COVID-19, it's fear. So when you actually start to look around you, you can and watch the way the propaganda works. Propaganda is ubiquitous. It uses every possible mechanism, every possible medium to send the same message. Now, if you actually look around, I think where I am anyway, I know there's posters, there's some TV, it's on the radio, everywhere you go, there's billboards by the roadside, every single thing. And on the pathways near where I live, there are these figures like matchstick men in white paint, two figures and two arrows separating them to show you what 2 meters looks like, as if people wouldn't know. So, but what they struck me as immediately was that they're like the lines that the police investigators draw around the bodies, the corpses of murder victims. And this is, to enhance the fear. Mm-hmm. So you see, everything is triggered to try and create this mentality. And this is the amazing thing about it, that I've now really, even at the height of the worst, apparently, of the pandemic, you could look at a street in Ireland, in Dublin or any city, and it looked reasonably normal, other than maybe there were less people around than usual, but people didn't look so. Now they look completely strange. They look like alien beings. They're wearing these extraordinary masks, which are quite grotesque. They cover their faces completely, their noses, and there's so many metaphors you could use of that. I mean, one that occurred to me only yesterday was the whole idea. It's like a halter. It's like the bridle and bit that you when the horse is broken in, that's the task, is to
John,
to wear this.
I want to interrupt just quickly because of what Fauci's saying recently. We're going to be adding the goggles soon.
Yeah, I heard that yesterday. That's amazing. Because we were kind of wondering what was going to happen next. And somebody said, well, they can go in through the eyes, so yeah, goggles. But, if you go back to March, you'll see Dr. Fauci saying that masks are useless unless you actually have the virus. That was his core argument. And there's absolutely no benefit, he said, to masks.
Well, John, thank you so much. And look, they're going to get the goggles, and then there's going to be this space suit, and then they've got to stop us from looking at each other. And we'll discuss this. Maybe we agree or disagree to some extent, but I believe that there's spiritual forces that want to stop us from seeing each other, communicating with each other, etc. And you've written on some of this.
I totally agree. That's exactly what I was saying.
Thank you, John. But look, you've written an article, and I really encourage all of our readers, our viewers, but you could also be readers, to read John's article, Viral Entrancement. And John, it was fascinating. It was just what you were just talking about. But there's a hypnosis going on. And there's also, you write about how there's hypnotic and spell phrases to herd individuals into the mass. And so you bring up, for example, the examples of how they use racist and homophobe as accusations to force people to behave in a certain way and not to resist. But I was fascinated how you're showing that it's sort of like cattle. When cattle are stung by the prod or the electric fence, that they fall into line. And this is exactly what's happening now in terms of, you put it on TV and Oprah and all of them are on there. Stay safe, social distancing, take care, put on the mask. Like even Biden now has this commercial with the mask on. But all of these phrases, the way that they're speaking about all this staying safe, all of it is a mass hypnosis going on. It's like it's putting the cattle, the herd, into the line, right?
That's right. And people learn to repeat these phrases. They say to you, it's a deadly disease, it's a deadly disease, it's a deadly disease, it's a deadly disease. People say it to you, oh yes, but it's a deadly disease, it's a deadly disease. And they have, this is a fascinating concept because, language is magic, really. You can do magic with language. And these guys are doing it. They're very sinister individuals. Whoever is behind this is a very sinister and sophisticated operation. If you think of that idea of the cattle prod, think of the phrase conspiracy theory. Now that's an amazing phrase. That's a real magic phrase because it actually, in this context, stops people even thinking about what's going on. As soon as you say, oh, you're a bit of a conspiracy theorist there, Jamie, you suddenly think, oh, no, I'm not. Now you think about the phrase conspiracy theory, 2 words. What does it say, really, objectively? What it says is that somebody has a theory in relation to a conspiracy somewhere or other, right?
Right.
So the sinister aspects of the word conspiracy, and they do exist, now that's the magic in the phrase, they refer to that conspiracy somewhere, right? But that phrase conspiracy theory flips that, and it attaches all the sinister elements to the word theory, to the theorist. So the conspiracy theory is the person who is having the theory is suddenly a sinister being who is really, trying to create these kind of dark kind of ideas and to question authority and question the experts in this context and question the science.
Right. Absolutely. And John, in one of those hypnotic phrases, as you point out, is saving lives. You're saving lives. And then, as we know, these sheep, these people who want to worship the totalitarian entity, and that's very strong in a lot of people. And they very much pride themselves on wearing the mask, saving lives. They become very judgmental in this way. But let's talk about that mask for a minute, because this is what your video was about. And it's interesting, we can't see each other anymore. And we're saving lives by perhaps not hugging the people we love, kissing the people we love, communicating with the people we love, staying at home while BLM and Antifa destroy our country. So, but you've written about how this mask is a symbol of pseudo-solidarity. It's an instrument of fear-mongering, of alienating. And you talk about that it's, that you see when somebody wears a mask, you point out that it's the visible evidence of terror. And so therefore, if somebody's wearing a mask, that means that we should be afraid. And everybody's kind of become zombies, and you can't see the human face of a person. There's something where you've said that this is actually destroying the spirit of the human person.
Yeah, well, you've often heard that the face is the mirror of the soul. That's where you can, when we look at each other, what we see is the face. We don't look at each other's elbows or our shoulders or our knees. We look, by and large, we look at each other's faces. That's how we know the person, the soul of the person. If you block that, you block the soul, right? That's the first thing. Now, the second thing about it is that if you know biologically about the human person, you know, for example, that there are actually more bacteria on the body of the human person than there are actually human cells. And there are many, many more viruses on the body than there are bacteria. Now, this is an amazing concept. So if you think about it, if you start to think about the human person in that way, in that dark way, it changes your entire image of what you're looking at, right? Now you think about our culture, that sounds like, well, you know, you would say, well, it's a truthful image. Yes, it's a quantum image, if you like, of the human person. And it's in a certain scientific sense, biological sense, it's true. But we don't actually take on board necessarily all truthful images of each other. There are lots of functions that we all do every day that we don't, when we see each other, we don't see each other in that way. To take a kind of an example which everybody will recognize. I mean, we think of Elvis Presley. We don't think of the moment of his death and the situation he was at that moment. You know, we think of the spectacular human being, this extraordinary voice, you know, that spastic dance that changed the world and brought black music and white music together in one instant in Memphis and changed the world as a result. That's what we see. So if we start to think about Elvis as he was at the moment he died, then we totally debase our sense of what Elvis was, what he represented, okay? Now, the same is true of all of us. If we start to think of each other in that quantum way, in that nano sense, you know, of all the bacteria, we see, and with the mask on, the soul gone, the soul obliterated, we see not another human person, not, you know, Jamie or John or Annie or whatever, Ali or whatever it is. We see essentially a biohazard, a danger to me. This person is a threat to my health. And this is one of the things they've done, that previously when a person was unwell, in any way, they were an object of sympathy, you know, and care and compassion, right? Now they flipped that. You're an object of suspicion and hatred because you are responsible for your own health and you're not taking the proper precautions. You are endangering my life because you are not wiping out your face.
Right. Very, very profound, John. We got to bring you back for round 2 of this. But we'll end with that also the mask, we can say a million things about it. And one of the things, as you just said as well, just, yeah, the dehumanization of people, etc. But it's a form of accusation that you are threatening my life if you don't have the mask on. And that person who's not wearing the mask is shamed. And then there needs to be a Maoist-style self-recrimination session, right? Something very totalitarian here. John, thank you so much for your work, for all that you're doing, because you're telling the truth in these very frightening, dark times. Before we go, tell our viewers where they can follow you and your work.
You can catch me from time to time in First Things. There's lots of my articles on there. If you find the list of contributors and click on, you'll see lots of my articles. The ACI, Anti-Corruption Ireland website, has some articles on as well as some other articles. And JimO'Doherty.com. She's my partner in anti-corruption, who and we do conversations once a week or so, long conversations about all these things. So you find those videos on there on her web.
Fantastic. And also, of course, John Waters on Twitter, right?
Well, yeah, that's a different story, Jamie. I'm not a big fan of Twitter, but I have, when I was running for election in February, I was persuaded to go on, and I'm now being persuaded to ramp up my contributions, which I'm reluctant to do because I do think that Twitter is actually, I have this theory that, or belief that, you know, in 50 years' time, when they ask, you know, the anthropologists start to ask each other, you know, what happened to Western civilization? How did it come to such a sorry end? And they start the investigation, and they will come up with one word and one word only, and that word will be Twitter.
Oh my goodness. Well, maybe Instagram as well. John Waters, thank you so much for coming on the Glazov Gang.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Nice to talk to you.
And please stay strong in continuing your brave and noble truth-telling.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And we'll see you on the Glazov Gang very soon. Good night.